Hello everyone, this is the Red Riot Robot coming to you with another 15 game roundup from Steam Next Fest. This year I played 55 demos. A lot of them were really good, and I had to whittle that list of games down to 15 that I really liked because I need this video to not be a nightmare to make. Let's get into the list. Starting with number 15, White Knuckle. Hey, did you play Jusant and had a relaxing time and were thinking to yourself, man, I need a game that makes me nervous and makes my heart palpitate as something is coming to kill me as I climb this cliff? If you did, I have the game just for you, and that's White Knuckle. This game's very interesting. We have, like I said, Jusant is probably the really relaxing climbing game that came out a couple of years ago, but White Knuckle is genuinely hard. If you want something where you are constantly having to move, constantly having to keep on your toes and move forward, because what's happening in the game is you're in a facility that's kind of shaped like a silo where a biomass is slowly creeping upward, and if you are too slow, you will be caught in it and die. This game is not controller friendly. Everything's kind of built for mouse and keyboard. I don't know if they're ever going to make this controller friendly, so if that's a sticking point, sorry. Like, the way you control your hands is left click is your left hand, right click is your right hand. Each hand has its own stamina based on the color of your hand. White is full stamina, red is low or empty, and it'll slowly change gradient as you hold on to something. You do get items that can help you, like food. If you eat something while you're hanging there, it'll restore your stamina, but if you do that, you have to let go with one hand while you hold on. So it's this really coordinated thing you have to do, because you have to remain holding one of the mouse buttons while you open your inventory, and you can put things to a quick button, specifically 1 and 3, but you then have to eat that thing, drop it, and then go back to holding on. You also have pittons, but you can't just put a piton into a wall and forget about it. You have to put it in, and then you have to hammer it 3 times, or else it'll fall. So that means you have to put in a piton with one hand, and then likely start holding on to that thing you're holding on with the first hand. Use the other hand to hit in the piton 3 times while you reach and grab it so you can continue climbing. So it's this really hectic experience. There's other things like, I'm going to call them rope arrows that you can throw, that you can use to climb. There's also bars you can throw into the wall. These you don't have to hammer in, but they're much rarer. And yeah, that's what this game is. It's about inventory coordination and all of that under pressure. I highly recommend playing the demo, as it's still available. It was available before the Steam Next Fest, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna leave it up. And definitely do the tutorial before you play the rest of the game. And yeah, that's White Knuckle. Number 14, Lost in Random, The Eternal Die. This is a Hades-like roguelike. The big caveat in this one is that outside of your normal melee weapon, which they just give you the sword in the demo, trailer does show some other weapons, your other big weapon is your die that you throw. Also cards. The die you throw can land on 1 through 6, and you get abilities that can activate depending on what number it lands on. Like, the big ability I got in this is when I threw a die, fire would be shot out if it landed a 1 or 2. And then you're allowed to carry 1 card, which is a tertiary ability outside of the die. The one I got was a poison dagger initially, and I was able to upgrade that by getting a passive buff that chains lightning between any characters that have poison attribute. overall, this game very much feels pretty good. There's not a lot to say if you've played Hades. It is pretty standard, but there is something to be said about a game that does a lot of things right. This is a sequel to the first game, which was just called Lost in Random, and I remember playing it and thinking, you know, this concept would work really well as a roguelike, and I'm glad that they decided to make one. You don't need to have played the original to play this. I also really like the art style. These guys have a very Tim Burton-esque art style, so if you like Nightmare Before Christmas, you'll love this. That's about all there is to say about Lost in Random. It's a really well-made Hades-type roguelike. Number 13, Nitro Express. This is a side-scrolling arcade shooter. The demo consists of 2 levels. The first level is a tutorial that just kind of introduces you to how the game works, and the second level is actually the first level. It is a fairly simple game if you've played any game similar to like Contra. You walk to the right and you shoot stuff. Now, there are some extra little bells and whistles with this. You do have a grenade button. You also have the ability to choose what weapon you start a level with, but I couldn't do that in the demo. But you do get to go into the armory at the beginning of the first real level and kind of see all the different weapons. You get 2, the assault rifle and the shotgun. The assault rifle works how you would think, and with the shotgun, you have to load each individual shell, so you have to take both of those things into mind whenever you're using a gun. The shotgun can kill a lot of bigger enemies in one shot, but it has that long reload cycle, whereas the assault rifle is really good for taking care of like smaller enemies and stuff. And so I have a feeling the game will want you to pick usually a weapon to deal with smaller enemies and a weapon to deal with bigger enemies. And that's about it. This is another game that is very simple, but it executes everything it does extremely well, and sometimes getting all of that right is enough to be very impressive, and that's sort of what Nitro Express is. It also looks fantastic. The pixel art for this is really, really good. I'm looking forward to seeing more of the game down the line. Number 12, Wanderstop. This is the new game from the guy who made the Stanley Parable. It's sort of exactly what you think it is. It is a very relaxing game that is a combination of gardening and tea making, and also some cleaning up. The bigger thing to talk about with this game is probably the story, which is the story of a character who was a fighter who worked really hard to get as good as she could get at fighting, but after 3.5 years of being undefeated, she is defeated, and then she loses more and more fights, and she doesn't know what's wrong, and she sets out to find someone to train her to get better. But along the way, she finds it hard to continue carrying the sword, and she passes out in the woods. She is found by Boro, who runs this tea shop, and he sort of convinces her to make tea, even though she doesn't want to. And the story is a very obvious context of burnout. When you've done something for so long, you want to continue doing what you think you love, but you sort of feel like a failure in doing it. Nothing you do will be good enough. And that's sort of what this is getting at. And the big lesson being, take your time, stop and smell the flowers, or stop and make tea. This is a pretty good game. It's very simple, and it seems like it'll be a relaxing time. and I might not get it day one. I might wait because there's a bunch of stuff coming out both this month and next month, but I'll probably get it down the line this year. Number 11, Beyond the Ice Palace 2. This is a sequel to an NES game that I vaguely remember playing. I don't remember what happened in it, but I do remember it. You don't need to have played the first game to play this. This is sort of a Castlevania-like, specifically the first Castlevania, not Symphony of the Night, where it's kind of this linear experience rather than a like an explorable castle. Your main weapon are chains that you escape the grasp of, but you kind of are able to use them to swing around, and you use them like a whip. They're like the Belmont whip. You can use an ability that you spin it and it blocks all ranged attacks. Everything feels good to use. It's not a very fast-paced game, and that's fine because it works. It's very well paced, and it looks really good. I actually like how this game looks and how the enemies look. And I know I've kind of said this like twice now, but this is another example of something within a genre where it just doesn't really do a lot of things wrong. It is a nice meat and potatoes experience. Everything's well put together. Yeah, this is Beyond the Ice Palace 2. Something to keep your eye out on. Number 10, Genokids. This is a character action game that is inspired by Devil May Cry and really feels like Final Fantasy 16 if it had a lot more depth to it. Like, this fixes a lot of my issues with Final Fantasy 16, which is really funny because this game has had a demo for longer than Final Fantasy 16 has been out. So, I don't know. The demo is just one level. Each character has like one basic combo similar to Final Fantasy 16. The thing that differentiates them is their special moves. The difference here is that the special moves are, in my opinion, easier to pull out than what is available in FF16, and also they flow a lot better in this game. You also have a closing in mechanic that is available for all characters. This is really useful to move between enemies after you've defeated them. There is a button to launch enemies into the air. This game highly encourages you to juggle the enemies. You can tell that they are looking into the idea of a lot of combo potential, especially once you have all four characters, whereas this demo, you only have access to two. One character who uses a sword, and a lot of it is about doing a lot of small damage here and there, and the other character who uses fist weapons. They hit a lot harder, but they're a little bit slower. This is especially highlighted in their super forms, where the character with the sword shoots swords out as they attack, and the character with the fists just hits harder. And I do really like these special moves they also gave. They feel weighty, they feel good to land, they suck to miss. You can dodge out of most attacks, but there are a couple you can't, and those are high damage attacks. I do like the visuals for this game. It has a very kind of cartoonish aesthetic. I would say this is probably the best indie character action game I've ever played, because you'll have some here or there. There was that spy game that came out a few years ago, and that was decent. It had a few issues, but this really feels good. And if you've been hankering for something like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, or even something close to FF16 since it came out, check this out. It's really good. Genokids.
Leave it to me!
Number 9, The Horror at Highrook. This is an eldritch horror time and resource management game. It's not the most exciting footage, but I found it addictive and I played this for 3 hours, so I kind of figured it kind of deserves to be on higher up on the list than most. Basically what you do is you have a team of paranormal investigators who are investigating the disappearance of a family at Highrook Manor. Every character has a set of stats that they're really good at, and you set them to do specific jobs. Like there's a section, a little tile that you put the job that you want them to do in a specific room, and then you put that character in that room and they'll do that specific job you assign to that room. Sometimes these jobs are to gain resources, sometimes these jobs are to continue the plot. Sometimes a job requires, say, like a 3 in medicine. Well, there's no character has a stat of 3 in medicine, so you have to create resources that give you bonuses in medicine before you're able to explore that specific job. And you can do that by having one character sleep with a specific item, and they'll dream a sigil, and you can use that. You can have another character dig up mushrooms, or another character can hunt. And you do need a character constantly hunting, or hunting regularly, so they can get food, and you have to kind of rotate them on sleeping because there is a fatigue mechanic. Fortunately enough, these aren't like crazy hard to keep intact because they seem to drop at a reasonable rate instead of it being constant. If I have like one issue with this game, it is that if you are really good at it, like I was, you will be spending 5 minutes trying to figure out what to do next to only realize that you weren't doing anything wrong. You just needed a specific amount of time to pass before the game gives you the exact thing to finish the game. I played through it twice just to make sure I wasn't crazy. And yeah, you have to wait for the very last thing, and it's like, oh, okay. So I don't know if it's possible, maybe expedite that. But otherwise, I enjoyed it. I enjoy the writing here. It's very investigative, very good. If you like time management games, I would recommend this. It's really, really good. The one thing it doesn't explore is the leveling mechanic, because all of the characters you have are level 1, which tells me that there will be higher levels where you can improve them, and you aren't able to access the entire house, which is fine. You access enough of it because there's not a whole big difference in what you do in each room. Keep an eye out. The Horror at Highrook. Number 8, UNYIELDER. So UNYIELDER is a fast FPS that controls like Ultra Kill and is essentially a boss rush roguelike. The major mechanic in this is parrying and countering bosses. Bosses have attacks. They have a sort of wind-up noise and animation, and if you hit them right before they attack, you land a counter, and you are able to get resources like shield, ammo, and health. This game is very unforgiving. If you miss like even one of these, it can hit you back really, really hard. You only have about, I would say, 4 to 5 hits before you die, and those hits can happen fast. Sometimes I get right up close to them, shooting them, and I wait for that sound cue to happen. That's usually the best thing to go by, and I land the counter, and I'm just right in their face while I'm doing it, and it feels really good. Which I have to say, this game has amazing sound design. This game feels really good to shoot things. It feels really good to land that counter. And yeah, I like how it looks. I'm definitely going to keep my eye out for this. Number 7, Neo Junk City. This is a cyberpunk point-and-click adventure game where you play as a police robot who first wakes up after being reported for malfunctioning, and in the tutorial you kind of get to learn how the game functions, the 3 main types of gameplay. The first being basic point-and-click adventure type stuff, solving puzzles, looking at items, and matching them with the thing that you need to match them with so things can move forward. 2, the way you fight in the game, which is a first-person arcade shooter, like an old-school one, where enemies will pop on screen and shoot at you, and you shoot them back. And I actually really, really like this. And the other major minigame, driving. Outside of this, there's no other driving in the demo, but there will be driving in the main game. I do like the writing in this. I think it's a little bit witty. But the main crux of the game's plot is that after the tutorial, the robot you play as wakes up to have found out that they have shot the scientist who is helping them reacclimate into becoming a police robot. And instead of turning themselves in, they're going to figure out what happened and solve the crime themselves, sort of resisting their own programming. So I have a feeling there's going to be multiple endings with this. This game does have an autosave, but boy, it doesn't autosave as often as you think, and I had to redo a good 10 minutes of stuff because I decided it'd be a good idea to do something that would clearly get me killed, and I learned my lesson there. Outside of that, it is a point-and-click adventure game. If you've played one, you've played them all, you kind of know what you're doing. You pick things up, you look at them, you see what they're good for, you find ways to solve puzzles with them, and so on. There is another element where you will get into fights regularly in certain areas, and you're going to be getting money from this fight, so I have a feeling that there will be some elements of like a store. Maybe you'll be able to improve yourself. There is a boss fight in this game against a spider guy. That's sort of what Neo Junk City is. It's a point-and-click adventure game with some aspirations of arcade mini-games. And I do like these arcade games. They control very well. And I like how this game looks overall. So check it out, Neo Junk City. Number 6, The Great Villainess-Strategy of Lily. You play as the titular villainess, Scarlet, who is accused of lighting the Capitol on fire and murdering the Emperor. Scarlet never denies doing this, but she never confirms it either. She kind of just likes the fact that she's allowed to fight in the situation she's put in. I kind of like the characters in this game. They all seem to have really fun personalities, and that is really carrying it for me. I do like this kind of art style they're going for, because it's this HD 2D art style that we've been getting with like Bravely Default and that Star Ocean 2 remake. The gameplay for this has 2 segments. One is the map that you're put on. You have to move from base to base, capturing them, and as you capture it, you get little blips of health so that it takes longer for an enemy. If they get on that spot and no one's there to defend it, it'll take longer for the enemy to take over that spot. And that's important for down the line when you're finally going in for the finishing blows. You need those bases built up so that you can take the last boss, which will likely take multiple rounds, and all of your units all in the same spot. Now, the second segment of the gameplay is the combat. The combat is fairly simple. It's a turn-based 3-round skirmish. You have to attempt to do as much damage to the enemy as possible within those 3 rounds. You get ability points for basic attacks, and you have to sort of use those ability points to use stronger attacks than the second or third round so that you can try to finish off enemies as quickly as possible. There is a Fire Emblem-esque like triangle weakness chart, so it's a good idea to have specific units against other specific units. If a unit that is weak to another unit and they attack that unit, the stronger unit is allowed to counterattack and do extra damage on their turn. The big thing with Scarlet, though, is that she can go, I'm just going to say super, and is strong against all enemy units, and once she's in that state, she counters everything. But you can't do it at the opening volley of a skirmish. And so that's the main pillar of the combat, but there's one more thing that's a little bit of a combination, and that is the blimp. You have a blimp that has abilities that affect combat both on the macro and micro level. On the macro level, on the map, it can be used to halt enemy movements in the specific abilities it has. And on the micro level, it is allowed to put debuffs on enemies when you're fighting them in these skirmishes. And these are it's important to know what ability to set the blimp to, as it'll be important for finishing off especially bosses, because one ability it has is to capture the big boss of a chapter. It seems like that'll be the way you finish off the bosses of every chapter. Overall, this is a really good demo that shows off how this game works. I know it might not sound like the most exciting thing, but when you're trying to finish off a boss before your base is taken over, it can get a little tense. And that's the great Villainess-Strategy of Lily.
外さねえただの練習だその程度かプロデュースはお任せあれ派手に行くよちくしょう近づかせすぎた抜けらんねえ
Number 5. Haste, Broken Worlds. Hey, remember those really bad Sonic 06 Supersonic levels? Well, what if someone made those types of levels, but really good, and a roguelike? That's Haste. There's not a lot of story to this. It's kind of coy with it. There's some characters and stuff, but so far all we know is that there's something eating up the worlds. It is following right behind you. Outside of that, this game is all mechanical, and the mechanics for this are simple but very satisfying. Basically what you want to do is you want to come off of hills when you hit the top of them, jumping, and when you are in the air you can press a button that makes your character dive downward, and what you want to do is you want your character to hit on a downward slope, as that will help boost your character. It's hill surfing in a weird way, so it's popping up and landing. You do have a way to boost yourself both in the air and on the ground. You press a button, it gives you a little board that increases your speed very quickly, or if you're in the air, it keeps you gliding at a steady pace. And both of these are useful in specific situations. The roguelike elements are boosting your ability to gain speed, the ability to gain boost, and your health, because there are obstacles as you go through the roguelike. Like the first level of the roguelike, there's no obstacles, it's just hills. By the end, you'll have lasers, mines, stuff shooting at you, fans, all of this stuff. And it's very hectic, but very, very fun. It has an awesome boss fight in this demo. That's it. This is a purely mechanical thing. I can't recommend this one enough. Especially just try it. It feels amazing to control this and runs surprisingly well for moving as fast as it is. So check it out. Haste, Broken Worlds. Number 4, Demon Tides. This is a sequel to a platformer that I own and haven't played called Demon Turf. This game is basically if you have the 3D movement of a Mario game, and I mean to a point that I hope that these guys don't get sued by Nintendo like Pal World got sued for patent infringement, because like this has a triple jump, a backflip jump, a long jump, all the things that are in a basic Mario game. But it also has like transformation powers similar to something in like Shantae, but this is a 3D environment. And this game's platforming is really, really good. I never felt like the game messed up. Anytime I failed at doing something, it was my fault. And it has about as much mechanical depth as that Pseudo Regalia game that came out a couple of years ago. And it's hard to put into words how many ways you can mix together moves, because it's like you can jump, do a spin attack, use your double jump after the spin attack, and it'll launch you farther. You have a ground pound, you have all these moves that I would have to spend like 30 minutes just talking about that, and I don't have the time, but it's a really good move set. It also has a stamp / emblem system where you can add effects to different moves. So if you really like that spin move, you can make it to where it gives you more air when you use it. And there's other versions, there's other emblems. The other thing about this game is it reminds me a lot of like Wind Waker. Just kind of feels that way. You can turn into a snake that can swim really fast between all of the islands. By the way, this whole game takes place in an ocean, and the levels are these islands that you go to, and they have a limited number of collectibles. The big collectibles are like golden gears, and once you get all the golden gears, you can enter a speedrun kiosk thing to race other people online and how fast to achieve getting all the gold gears as fast as possible. And there's like 2 categories: the default, which allows you to enter with anything, and one with no emblems. And the other collectible is just like I'm just gonna call it a trinket. I forgot what they were called. And that's what Demon Tides is. It's a really tight and solid platformer that provided a lot of material. I think this is only like 10% of the game, and it lasted me about 4 hours. So go check out Demon Tides if you've been looking for another great platformer.
Yeah.
Number 3, Drop Duchy. This is a Tetris strategy game. The goal of the game kind of depends on what level you have in this roguelike. The first type of level you'll have is resource gathering, and what it wants you to do is fill out horizontal lines. And for every horizontal line you fill out, you get whatever resources are on that line, but it doesn't make the line disappear, so you're just stacking a tower. There's a couple of little rules. If you say complete 1 line, you'll get a base amount of resources, but if say you complete 4 lines at once with a 4 stack, I believe it'll triple all of the resources in all of those lines. So there is a bit of strategy there, and the blocks you have will fit into usually either plain or forest. Plains will give you grain, and forest will give you wood if you complete aligned. But there are special deck builder tiles you can use that'll get you more. So there's a farm that if you put in the middle of a bunch of plains will turn all the plains into fields of wheat, and that'll, I want to say, double the amount of grain you get. You can also put a lumberjack tile that when you put it down, it cuts away all of the trees, but you instantly get that wood and create more plains, and once that happens, you can get even more grain from that. And so it's a balancing act in knowing what to put in, what do you need, grain or wood, because you use those resources to upgrade your cards. This is especially important in the second type of level where you're fighting an opponent. And the thing with the opponent levels, you still control where they land, and while that sounds like it would make it really easy to put them in a place where they don't get anything and they can't upgrade their units, it's a lot harder than you think, because there's not a lot of room in this. And what you want to use those grain and wood for is upgrade your cards, especially the cards that control attack units that you're able to get. And usually the attacks only happen at the end of the round of Tetris, once everything's on the board, or as much can fit on the board as possible. Hopefully to where your units outnumber the units of the enemy, because you have to create a chain that gathers your own units together and attacks the enemies, and certain enemies are weak to certain units. It's a very interesting little thing. The other thing is this is definitely made for like people who are into Tetris, because it does allow like tech. You can rotate yourself into a place that seems impossible, and I love that. I love it when you get these like Tetris ideas and they still allow that. And yeah, that's basically it for this. And despite it being as simple as Tetris strategy, this was probably the demo I came back to the most, since it was the first demo I played. It does have a progression tree that unlocks more and more possible tiles to use in the game that do wildly different things. That's Drop Duchy. If you really like Tetris, I recommend this. Number 2, the 100-line Last Defense Academy. Oh boy, this is going to be the longest one. I really like this demo, and I feel I have to explain this game. This was about a 5-hour demo, and so let's get into it. The basic premise of this game is you play a group of kids that have to defend a school from, they're called invaders, for a total of 100 days. The demo covers the first week of this 100 days. This comes from the team behind Danganronpa, so if you see the characters and you're like, that looks like Danganronpa, you're not wrong. So this is a cooperative work between Kazutaka Kodaka, the director of the Danganronpa series, and Kotaro Uchikoshi, the director of the Non-Eri game series. Unlike their previous series, this is not just a base visual novel, because this gameplay set into basically 3 columns. First column is the main action, which is this turn-based strategy tower defense game. So to start off, the enemies will come in waves, and these enemies will fall into 2 groups primarily. You have small, fast attackers who are going for the tower in the back, trying to destroy the shield of the school, and you have these tank-like enemies who are there to attack your own units. And similarly, your units fall into 2 groups. You have characters who can hit a lot of spaces, but they're not very strong attacks, so they're better for dealing with those small attackers. And the characters I will call mainliners, who are there to kill the big tank enemies, because they can usually one-shot them. Often the goal isn't necessarily to keep all of your units alive, as when the enemies are attacking the school, the characters can be revived after the mission is finished, so keeping them alive is not a main thing. You are there to keep the school from falling. This is emphasized with one of the special moves being a sort of last stand, where if a character is in very low health, they can do a special move that will kill them. It'll do extensive amounts of damage to whomever it hits, and it's usually a big attack. So characters are allowed to hit as many times as they want, but after you use a character once on a turn, their movement is severely hindered. And this is sort of a big deal for some characters. Other characters not so much, like some that have really big range, but characters like your mainliners who are there to get rid of the big guys, not being able to move as much sort of sucks. And that's where the voltage system comes in. It's a little bar at the top. Every attack you do, you gain voltage. And this is different based on how many enemies are taken out, what character's hitting, so on and so forth. Once you reach 100%, you have basically two types of option. The first option is Boost Hemo Anima, which allows either, so far, an increase into attack power for the rest of the mission, or the ability to move freely twice, which is really, really useful for some of your mainliners who do a lot of damage. Though that power one can also be really useful for dealing with enemies that fall into a sort of in-between really fast enemies that are going for the tower and the tankier enemies. The other option outside of Boost Hemo Anima is a special attack.
I'll smoke 'em! It's up to you from...
This usually hits for a lot of damage in a very wide area, even if you're using one of the mainliners who can only hit one or two enemies. And the downside to this, though, is that if you use this, whatever character you use cannot be moved for an entire turn. And this is sort of important because most of the time, waves only last about 3 or 4 turns. So they are out of the game for an entire quarter of a round, which is very important when you make that decision. And that's sort of the combat, as best as I can explain it here. But the second column is your basic visual novel stuff, about building relationships with characters to build stats and training around the school. It's pretty self-explanatory. You need to interact with the characters you have to be able to get better things for them and improve. You can upgrade new moves in the training area and also do training simulations, and this is a great way to earn a lot of experience points. And the third column is exploring outside of the school to gather resources and get experience. You don't get as much as experience as in the training room, but you do get experience. You have to watch characters' health outside of the school because they cannot be revived outside of the school. And I know that's a lot, and this will be the largest segment in this entire video, but this is really good. If you're someone who likes stuff like Fire Emblem, Unicorn Overlord, those types of strategy games where you have to think a bit, I would highly recommend this because this is who it's appealing to. And if you just like the Danganronpa and non-airy game series, the writing is as witty as it's ever been. These guys know what they're doing. I recommend this. And now on to our final game.
Pack your bags, mister. You're going to war.
Number 1, Labyrinth of the Demon King. This is a PS1 styled game made by someone called J.R. Hudepole. I apologize if I said your name wrong. This is clearly made by someone who loves FromSoft's early works like Kingsfield and Kuon. And if you don't know what that is, Kingsfield was FromSoft's first game. Kuon was like a horror game they made a long time ago. And this appeals to that handful of people who know what those games are. So let's get into what this game is. The basic premise is you are a soldier seeking revenge on the demon who betrayed your master. You get to their fortress and, well, their labyrinth. It's basically a Japanese fort. This game commits hard to the PS1 horror aesthetic. The draw distance is like a PS1 game, maybe not like as big as like Silent Hill, but if you remember what a PS1 horror game is like, there's like that kind of fog that enemies don't appear until you get close enough to them. And this game is purposefully put in a 4:3 screen ratio. This is not a widescreen experience. I don't know if that's a killer for some of you, but it's done on purpose. Big thing is this game wants you to feel claustrophobic, and it does a really good job of doing that. The soundtrack is similar to a John Carpenter score, where it's a bunch of tones, so you'll have these tones that just kind of linger and go on, and sometimes they get a little loud to where you start noticing them, and it's great. I love it. There are these cutscenes that are reminiscent of the like ghost intros of Silent Hill 4. And I know this was like a thing in a lot of Japanese horror at the time, but that's primarily where I remember it in as far as games go. Let's get to the gameplay. The gameplay is pretty simple. You have weapons, you know, swords, naginatas, hammers, some other stuff. Oh, also this game does have a like PS1 horror game inventory system. I don't know how else to describe that. Combat, it's not going crazy, but it's a bit more in-depth than like Kingsfield. Every weapon does have a combo, but you also have a strong attack that's used to break certain guards. You also have a kick that's pretty reliable at breaking guards, but also pushing enemies back. And that's your offensive abilities. Now, your defensive abilities, you do have a parry. Any attack from a weapon that an enemy is holding or just a fist attack, you can parry. But if an enemy tries to kick you or do a push, you have to dodge out of the way. Basically, you're fighting enemies who have the same basic set of skills you do. And they'll use all types of stuff like rusty swords, paneling itself, sticks, hammers, whatever. And I will say, while this game's combat is slow, it's very deliberate and it's very hard. You sort of have to learn what tells are and the windups and stuff, and you start getting into a rhythm for things. It is extremely slow paced. I want to make it clear that this is not a Souls game. When you die, you don't have to go back to collect the things that you may have lost. That does not exist in this game. As far as I know, when you die, you keep all the things you had on you, which makes me think that there will be a sort of different ending depending on how many times you died, which wouldn't be unusual for this type of game. And that's sort of everything for this. It is a fantastic horror kind of action experience. This is something that I didn't realize I wanted until I got it, and I am definitely buying this day one. And that is my favorite game for this Steam Next Fest. That's the end of the Steam Next Fest roundup. I might shorten this to 10 down the line because I think 15 is just a little bit too much. I did really like this Steam Next Fest. It had a great variety, like I said at the beginning. I think I'm finally getting comfortable with doing recording. I just got a desk to be able to more easily write notes instead of having to do it on my lap. And as always, if you've watched to the end, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it. This is the Red Riot Robot signing out. Have a good night, everyone.
Congratulations!